Somebody recently asked me a question about crowdsourcing to beat writer's block. And I thought that was an interesting idea and an interesting question, and so I wanted to address it a little bit. Before we get into that, we have to address a myth, and that is the myth of the solo creator. If you're new to the channel, welcome. My name is Seth. I'm a full-time fantasy author, and I really enjoy making videos about being an author and writing and that sort of stuff. So if that's what you're into, definitely click the subscribe button, like the video, so that Google knows that you want to see more of these. Even though I'm the one who writes my books, like nobody else writes my books, I write all of them, every word. What looks like a solo act is not a solo act. Now, I use a pretty complicated process of editors and beta readers and people who are engaging with my work at very early levels because I'm completely comfortable with it. Not everybody is comfortable with it. Some people follow the advice that you shouldn't show your manuscript to anybody until it's completely done. And that's fine. You can do that. I know there are some really famous and tremendously talented authors who do that. I don't think that's the best way to move forward, which is why I don't do that. But I'm not here to pick a fight with anybody about their own process, because everybody has a different process. What I will say is that no creator creates alone. Every time you get up from your chair and you walk out into the wider world and you engage with people, you are acquiring grist for the mill. You are acquiring ideas and bits and pieces of emotion that you can use in your writing. So many times I've been having a conversation with someone, and what they say triggers a chain of thoughts in my head that result in me figuring out problems in my stories. Or I'll see something, and it'll spark an idea, and I'll be able to spin off an entire novel based on that idea. Now you might say, well, Seth, you came up with the idea. It was your idea. You had the vision. You executed on the vision. Doesn't that make you a solo creator? In the weakest sense of the term, sure. But in reality, writing is a reflection of our thoughts about life. And if you remove the life piece, then you just end up with our thoughts. And if there's nothing to think about except for myself, my books aren't going to be any good. And that is a hill I will die on. One of the disturbing tendencies of modern literature is this intense navel-gazing, where everything becomes about the writer, and those books are terrible. Instead, books that endure, books that stand the test of time, are books that accurately reflect something about reality. They don't have to be about true events. They can be fantasy, they can be fiction, they can be made-up stories. That doesn't matter. What they do is they capture a real feeling, a real thought, a real experience, and they represent it to the reader. Okay, now that I've gotten all philosophical, let's talk about the nuts and bolts of actually using other people as a way to beat writer's block. One of the things that I think is so important when you are experiencing writer's block is that you just go out and increase the number of experiences you have. Break out of your regular routine. Walk the opposite direction on a path you normally take. Do something you've never done before. Talk to people who you've never talked to before. Go to a coffee shop and make it a goal to try and talk to a couple different people. Now, I can hear some of you already saying, but Seth, I'm an introvert. I'm shy. That seems scary. Good. That's the whole point. Do something you don't normally do. Because if what you're doing isn't working, if it's leading to writer's block, then the natural solution is to do something else. Again, I mentioned earlier that we have this idea that creating is all about bringing out my expression. And it is, but it's really about bringing out my expression of a universal theme, giving my perspective on something that exists in the outside world. And how are you supposed to do that if you just never experience the outside world? No matter how much of a genius a writer might be, the reality is that their ideas are not necessarily better than other people's ideas. Usually, they just have a higher rate of ideation. That means that they have more ideas in a shorter amount of time. And because they have more ideas, they can sort through the bad ones and pick the best ones. For those of us who aren't geniuses, which is the mass majority of us, how do we mimic that genius effect? How do we mimic those same conditions? One really good way to do it is to just get more ideas. And what better way to get more ideas than to have a whole group of people throwing their ideas into the middle? What typically happens is that as people have ideas and submit them to the group, more ideas will start spawning as they bounce off of each other, creating new and interesting variations. However, I do need to issue a warning here. It's very important when you engage with a group of people and you say, hey, I want to crowdsource some ideas. Let's talk about this specific thing. What do you think? It's very important that you clearly identify before you even start whether or not you are going to take their ideas or whether or not you are going to consider their ideas. This is actually a management trick, and I think it really applies to crowdsourcing creative material. If you're in a leadership position and you need to make a decision, it's important to let people you're collaborating with know whether or not it is a group decision or whether or not it is your decision. Because if you walk up to people and you start asking them questions, their thoughts about particular things or for ideas that might help you move forward in your project, it's really easy for them to get the impression that you are there to get group consensus on an idea. Or that if you're asking them, it is their decision as to what you end up doing. And so it's very important to be clear in this. You might say something like, hey, I'm looking for more ideas to help me consider what my best path forward is. Or, I'd really like to come to a decision about this particular thing with the group. If you don't open the conversation setting clear expectations, you're going to find people becoming disappointed. That's one of the reasons that I try to be very clear. I don't always succeed with this, but I try to be very clear with anybody who starts beta reading for me that I am open to any and all suggestions. However, I am ultimately going to make the choice that I think best suits the story. So I might accept somebody's idea and then iterate on it until I come to something that I think is going to suit the story best. Or I might say, that's a really interesting idea. I'm going to file that away for later, but I'm not going to use it for this story. Just like this conception of the solo creator is really a myth, it's also a lie to believe that if we ask somebody for their opinion, we have to take what they say. No, we don't. We can say, thank you for your insight, but I'm not going to do that. Because ultimately, it is our story. But I'd love to throw it back to you. Have you ever used crowdsourcing to break through writer's block? Let me know down in the comments below how it went.